So now we're talking about double underhook. Okay, double underhook is a situation in which I elevate both of my opponent's elbows above the shoulder line and potentially above the head. It's one of the trademark positions in the sport. Now, the best path to double underhook is off of a single chest wrap. We lift, we switch to a far lat, switch my hips, drive, and now really, regardless of where he puts this arm, he tries to hide it, there's really nowhere he can go. So I can go ratchet up, it's a very compromised position. At this point, I want to lift, go underneath, and lock my double underhook. Now, as often the case in control positions, the tighter the lock, the more stress and pressure I can put on my partner, but the smaller is my base of support. So when I have a very tight lock, if he goes to bridge, of course I can still go and separate my hips like we already looked at in the very beginning when we talked about mount maintenance. But if I get caught off balance, a very strong bridge, my base of support is compromised. So the wider the grip, so elbow to elbow, wrist to wrist, palm to palm, 10-finger grip. Obviously you want to avoid 10-finger grip unless you're dealing with someone with very, very broad shoulders. But as a general rule, elbow to elbow, or rather shoulder to elbow, that's the tightest with smallest base of support. Wrist to wrist is usually a good compromise between the two. So now I can base out with my elbows a little bit more, but I'm still pretty tight. My recommendation is that you start off and you ride out the first very explosive bridges with a wider base of support so that you can really exhaust your partner and let him bridge and bridge and bridge. And you just ride out the bridges. And now you can go and start putting some serious pressure on your partner once the bridges become weaker and weaker. So from this position, understand that this is a primary armbar position. Now, that doesn't mean that this is the only thing that I can do. From double under, just like from single chest wrap, I could go into my Nelson, okay? If whatever reason I feel like I'm losing the elbow, I can still punch through my Nelson and use my underhook to elevate his elbow above his shoulder and use the Nelson to turn, okay? So just like here, and I can use this to elevate and get to my Nelson. From the double underhook is exactly the same. So if for whatever reason I feel like I'm missing something, there's just not enough pressure, I don't want to risk, I want to take the back, I want to cook him further, whatever the case might be, I can go into a Nelson from here, okay? I can potentially, maybe he brings the elbow in, whatever the case might be, I can go into a Nelson, okay? There is nothing preventing me from here. I start driving, creating a little bit more separation, and I drive my hand through, okay? It's just like we did earlier. I just enforce a Nelson from double underhook. So understand that that is always an option, and because double underhook is a fairly symmetrical position, I can go both sides. So that's always an option. Another great option, as we said, is armbar. Now, this is where this idea of stable position versus unstable transition really manifests itself, because as you can imagine, double underhook is a very, very stable position, especially when I start driving forward, I can cross my feet. Really, there's not much he can do. The only thing that he can do is to use my movement as a time window to start generating even more movement and eventually get out. So I am very stable in double underhook. I am very stable in, we're going to look at this in a second, in this S-mount position. Here I'm also very stable, but in the transition is where I tend to lose the position, is where I tend to be fairly unstable, just like in the I'm very stable in side control, I'm very stable in mount, but when I go from one to the other is when I tend to lose the position. So how do we gain a very stable transition? Well, the first thing that you want to do is to pick a side, okay? It doesn't really matter which side you go. Forget about which side, which arm is exposed. He can always switch the sides of his arms and go and protect his arm, okay? So just go to the side you just find more comfortable, okay? Because at any point, you can always switch and go and defend his own arm. So just pick your side. For me, is my left side. So you want to bring the knee at the elbow here, almost like hiding the elbow inside my knee. And now you want to lift the head and really push with the knee on top of your triceps. So you can create this knee elbow connection that really puts a lot of pressure on your partner's elbows. So from here, because my head is forward, I have relatively light legs, and I can start lifting my partner's head and switch to an S mount. Okay, as you can see, I am 90 degrees perpendicular relative to my partner. Okay, I do not want to be facing his head. I want to be 90 degrees, and I am shelving his head with my leg, with my knee. My heel and my leg, my knee, should be as tight as possible. Will they always touch? No, they won't. It doesn't matter. Don't obsess and try to really bring the knee in a very awkward position so that you can touch heel and knee. It's fine. The point is that they are tight. Okay, there is this back heeling on this side and this shelving of his head to this side. So this is again a very stable position in which I can start again controlling my partner with my legs and manipulating his arms with my arms. Okay, so at this point, turn. At this point, obviously, he will try to protect his arm. Yeah, it will either lock something like this or a palm to palm, whatever the case might be. More often than not, he will lock into his own biceps because that's the stronger connection he can create. Okay, no worries. The best case scenario for me is to separate my opponent's arms while staying in this S mount because he's carrying a lot of weight. His head is bent and his chin is touching his chest. So when I go to properly put pressure on him and sit on his chest, when he goes to bridge from here, it's really, really tough. Okay? Because I am bringing his chest, I'm pushing his chin towards his chest. If I don't shelve my partner's head, even if I have weight on him, because he can extend his chin away from his chest, now he can bridge, and I'm much more unstable. It's a pretty good position, but I'm fairly unstable. Whenever I manage to force my partner's chin to his chest, when he goes to bridge from here, yeah, it's actually not very powerful. Okay, so this is why we want to really emphasize the shelving the head with my leg. Okay, so from here we're putting pressure on my partner's chest and we start separating the hands. Lock figure 4. Yeah, there you go. I want to go long hand on the lever and I want to bump his elbow. Again, very compromised position, lots of weight on his chest, and I am targeting the rotational. I'm not trying to extend here, I'm rotating. Okay, I have a very good lever and I'm rotating. When he goes to resist from here, it's actually pretty tough, especially with the amount of pressure that I'm putting on his chest. And now I want to pack his arm into my pocket. Here, turn. I really want to pack this into my pocket. I reinforce, and now I bring my chest next to my knee. when he goes to extract his arm, he can. But the question is, can he do this in the time allowed? And this is where the answer is no. It's going to be hard for you to make so much pressure here and pack this so tight that he will never be able to extract. Over time, go, 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 go. Over time, he will always be able to extract this arm. Except you don't have to stay here forever. In the time allowed, this will give you enough control to start attacking the actual arm. Okay? So, he locks. Yeah. I go and manipulate his arm and I pack it in. And I just go with my chest towards his elbow, buying myself time before I go into the submission. At this point, big a mistake that especially beginners tend to make, they tend to very sort of explosively pass this leg, or even worse, sitting and then try to pass the leg, everything falls apart. You want to emphasize drifting your body weight out and away in the direction where you're packing your partner's arm and posting. At this point, I go elbow deep and I catch my partner's arm. And now a very unathletic move, just passing and biting his head with my cross-faced leg. And now I can sit. He's going to relieve his arm. At this point, doesn't make any difference. His elbow is more than 90 degrees bent. I can just go elbow deep and start going into my break. Obviously, we're not going to go into a full armbar series because that would take us hours and hours and we'll go into a massive rabbit hole. But just to study the best case scenario, as it were, one in which we managed to separate my partner's hands and arms staying mounted, which is eventually what we want to achieve. So from here, I go, I pack, and I bring my weight over there. I go elbow deep, and at this point, it's going to be, even if he releases his arm, it's going to be pretty hard for him to lock his hands in any meaningful way. I can start separating his hands, and now I get the tap. Really, what you want to emphasize as much as possible is to shift your head out and away. This should not be a jump. This should not be an athletic move. It should be a controlled, slow movement. Remember, your partner will use your big and ample movements to get out. So the perfect example that I often talk about is the idea of climbing a ladder, going from rail to rail. You can jump 3 or 4 rails at a time, but the risk is that you miss the rail and you fall to the very bottom of the ladder. You want to go step by step. It's going to take you more time, but that's part of the point, because you're in a very controlled position in which time, as I already mentioned, is working in your favor. So I manipulate the hand, I pack 1, 2, and I go with my chest. At this point, I go elbow deep, very slowly, very carefully. I go and bite his hand, his face, bring my knees together. I go elbow deep, and now, even if he manages to get a connection, it's going to be very weak. Okay, I can usually go elbow deep, and I want to go with this high five grip that prevents him from generating any meaningful connection. When he goes to generate a connection here, it's actually very deep, very, very shallow, because my hand is in the middle. I go extend my back, and now it's the full extension of my back against a almost stretched arm, and I should always be able to go, pinch my knees, and bring my hips up until I get a tap. As I said, armbar is a massive rabbit hole, but for now, this should get through the early stages of your mount series.